What's up, everybody? Episode 133 on All Out War. I'm Turner, and I'm in the studio with Rosie. What's up, Rosie?
What's up, man?
Rachel can't be with us tonight. She's doing the mom thing, as usual.
Mm-hmm.
But
we let her know that is unacceptable.
I would say just put the kids outside. Let them, whoever survives.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, whoever survives gets it, right?
Yeah.
Keep them.
Spartan style.
Spartan styles. But she'll be back with us again soon. What do you know, man?
Hey, did you know that in 1908, the New York Times reported a story about a dog who would push kids into a river in order to earn a beef steak treat for rescuing them?
Isn't that like a Hegelian dialect?
It is, yeah. Dude, you want me to read the story? It's pretty quick.
Yeah.
It's called Dog, a Fake Hero. He pushes children into the scene to rescue them and win beefsteaks. So it says, apropos of the decision of so-and-so to employ dog auxiliaries for the patrol of lonely beats in the outskirts of Paris, a good story is now going the rounds concerning a splendid Newfoundland, which was a candidate for one of the recent field trials. The dog is a property of a man who lives on the outskirts of the scene. Whatever its French name, I don't care about pronouncing it correctly. They don't deserve it to be. I hope I'm intentionally.
Well,
I'm just kidding, French people. I love you.
Yeah, we love you.
Some time ago, a child playing on the riverbank fell into the water and was in imminent danger of being drowned. The dog, hearing the cries and the splashing, leaped over a hedge, ran down the bank, and plunged into the stream just in time to rescue the little victim. Naturally, the brave animal was made much of, and the father of the child, by way of recompensance, I can't read right now, presented him a succulent beef steak. 2 days later, another child fell into the water and was rescued by the dog. The lifesaver received the same caresses and another beef steak. Up until this point, there was nothing extraordinary, but rescues became more and more frequent. Hardly a day passed that some unfortunate infant was brought safely to the bank by the dog after an involuntary bath. It began to be suspected that the neighborhood was haunted by a mysterious criminal, and a special watch was inaugurated. Then the truth came out. It was the dog, the noble lifesaver himself, that was the guilty one. Whenever he saw a child playing on the edge of the stream, he promptly knocked it into the river, and then nonetheless promptly jumped into the rescue. He had thus established himself a profitable source of revenue.
You know, they actually asked the dog, they interviewed him, and they said, "Why were you doing this?" He says, "I did it for the beefsteak." Yo, I did it for the beefsteak.
Got to do it for the beefsteak.
That's what I did for the beefsteak.
Mm-hmm.
I see that little kid coming down the street, I just knock him in, I grab him and get him a beefsteak.
If Steakums hears him, that should be the mascot for Steakums.
The dog.
Yeah.
The Newfoundland hound or whatever.
There we go.
They're big dogs too.
They are very big.
It could knock a good-sized child down.
They can knock me over.
Probably, yeah.
If he came running?
Yeah. Drop your shoulder in.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I'd fight a dog.
That's right. Hey, I wanted to say real quick before we jump into the podcast, because this is an amazing episode.
Yes.
We have a great guest, but I just wanted to welcome all our new listeners, and I wanted to welcome anybody who's new to us on Instagram. If you are giving us a shot, thank you.
Thank you.
And we hope you're blessed and you enjoy it and you share it with your friends.
Yes.
Because we want to be big. We want to be... Who am I kidding? We're never going to be big. But
we're just happy that you're listening.
Yes. We don't do this to feed our families, which is always the good thing.
Yeah.
You know, we can't be compromised by the man forcing us to not say things and say certain things like that. So, so that's always the plus. And I think we're going to have some cool news coming up soon that we're looking forward to sharing very shortly.
Yeah. At the same time, we also do have a second podcast.
We do, yes.
And I was going to say, I just gave my testimony. So if you want to listen to that, we're going to start doing testimony series. So that's what you're missing out on.
Yeah. If you want to hear how Rosie became to be Rosie, you really want to check it out. It's called The Warcast. And you can just message me on Instagram, and I'll give you
the info.
Yeah, it is a paywall. And we have a couple slots open still. We only have 50 slots, I think, total, and we only have a couple left. So if anybody wants to, it is limited. So if you're in it,
for the trial right now. Yeah.
And so anyways, thank you for giving us a shot. And at that, I would say sit back, grab a coffee, and enjoy.
You're listening to the All Out War podcast.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of All Out War, episode 133. We have an awesome guest who I found by accident. I'm not going to lie. I was doing research on the Rapture, and he has written a great book called The Rapture. And his name is Ken Johnson. He's an author, a lecturer who speaks on a variety of issues in related Bible prophecy, ancient history, and the apostasy that will form in the church in the last days. He's received his doctorate in theology from the Christian College of Texas and Texas Arcana. And he is our guest today, and we're going to be talking about a number of different topics. It's going to be exciting. And Ken, I am just thankful that you have the time to be with us and to chat with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the program.
Yeah, so
it's our honor.
Yeah, it is. It is our honor. Like I said, I found you through some research I was doing on the Rapture. We had done several episodes on the Rapture, end time stuff, and I was really struggling through answering questions that people were presenting to me that were in opposition to a pre-tribulational rapture, which is the view that I have held for all of my salvation. I was saved in 1988. And so it's hard to move me off of it, just I think out of stubbornness and so long sitting in that camp. But it was a very helpful book, and I would recommend, and what I'm going to do is all of our listeners, just so you know, I will make all of the connections for Ken available on the show notes. He's got a YouTube channel. You can look for that. It's Ken Johnson. He's available on Telegram as BibleFacts.org. He has a website, BibleFacts.org. And so you can
tons of books,
so on Amazon.
Prolific.
Yeah. So, and they're not these big, heavy, 200, 300 page books, which is really nice. They're right to the point. So I appreciate that too, because I'm not an avid reader like that. I won't sit down and chew out a book in like 3 days. It takes me a while. So I appreciate that. So let's start. You have done extensive research on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and you were just talking to us about that. Share with us a little bit about the Dead Sea Scrolls and how those are important to us today.
Well, the interesting thing about it is, and I kind of did the same thing. I'm a Calvary Chapel guy. I have been for the past 20 years or so. But I grew up and went through lots of different denominations, and then I started looking at the early church fathers to see what the disciples of the apostles taught, kind of pull all the theology together. It pretty much agreed with everything that I'd thought about or believed. That's how I became a Calvary Chapel guy. And then as far as the Dead Sea Scrolls in seminary, we looked at them, but this has been a long time ago, like back in the late 80s. And so basically all it was is major copies of the scriptures rather. And so that's cool. That proves that nothing's been changed, but that didn't help us much. But in the late 1990s, their theology and the rest of the scrolls that we have came to light. And so the interesting thing about it is that they basically teach Christian theology. And that makes sense if you think about it. If the Holy Spirit spoke to the prophets and spoke to King David, I often wondered, how would David not know of a Trinity, for instance, or not know certain things about the Messiah? And he knew a lot, according to the scrolls. And so it's just really cool to see those kind of things. As far as the rapture goes, I'd always been a pre-trib rapture guy. I went back to the early church fathers and found out the majority of church fathers don't mention prophecy or don't mention the rapture at all. They're all premillennial, very, very clear on that, those that talk about it. And then those that talk about the rapture usually just talk about the rapture. It happens and it's cool, and they don't say anything about a timing. So it gets down basically, and what I did is I just looked at the first 200 years. And my concept is if everybody in the first 200 years said we learned this from the apostles and they all teach the same doctrine, then that's probably true. And then in the 3rd century, all of a sudden things change and nobody knows why. And so, but there's at least 6 early church fathers that are pre-trib, and it's very, very clear that they're pre-trib. And among other things too, a lot of people don't believe in the Nephilim theory, from Genesis 6, but that was consistently taught by the rabbis, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the church fathers, basically all that kind of stuff. So to me, it's very important. And as far as the Dead Sea Scrolls are concerned, it's really important to me because, Paul says in the end times the church would start apostatizing and get worse and worse. During that same time period, though, the believers among Jews get more and more godly, and more of them come to knowledge of Messiah. And I think that's directly connected with the scrolls, because you're taught by the rabbis that Christians are weird. Just stay away from them. They don't know what they're talking about. It's all a bunch of lies. Well, that's fine, but then the Dead Sea Scrolls come along, and they're about 400 years before any of the rabbis that are, Pharisee type, and they teach Christian doctrine. So that means at the very least, we didn't make anything up. We inherited our stuff from the Old Testament prophets, which is basically what the New Testament says. And so when you look at that, it's like, okay, forget churches per se, because maybe they are weird now. It's been 2,000 years. But the bottom line is there is a Messiah. He came to die for our sins. Like, for instance, my favorite Dead Sea Scroll is 11Q13. And it basically says that the Messiah is God incarnate. He comes for the purpose of dying for your sins. That somehow reconciles you with God and takes care of the problem we have with God. The event happens one Shemitah after the end of the 9th Jubilee of the 8th Ona, which on their calendar system, and it sounds funny, but it's just their calendar system. According to that actually ends up being 32 AD.
Wow.
So the Messiah is supposed to come and die for our sins in 30, give or take a year is fine, but I mean, that's what they taught. Once that happens, our sins are forgiven, and the age of grace starts. And there's a whole bunch of other things that are talked about. So that's just one particular small scroll, but the scrolls are full of stuff like that. And so it's really important for Jews to see this and begin to realize somebody's lied to us along the line, and they need to start exploring these things.
So for the listener that's not familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls, maybe they've heard of them, but they just don't understand what they are and what makes them what they are. Can you give a real brief explanation of that?
Yeah, basically, the Jews always believed like they're supposed to. When they came back from Babylon, they believed in the Messiah. They had what would be considered proper Jewish doctrine. And then when we get to that's the close of the Old Testament. When we get to the New Testament, instead of Jews being brothers and everything's fine, you've got Sadducees and Pharisees and Herodians and Samaritans and all these people trying to kill each other. So something happened in that missing 400 years. We used to call it the 400 silent years between the Old and the New Testaments, and nobody really knew anything about it. Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls are the history and the theology of the Essenes, and their history is that they map out that 400 silent years, and they tell you exactly what happened. So basically, the Essenes, led by the Zadok priests, are a denomination, if you will, of Jews. So there's Pharisees and Sadducees, Essenes, and things like that. And we know from the New Testament that the Sadducees didn't believe in spirits, didn't believe in life after death. The Pharisees did, but the Pharisees had a oral Torah that was kind of made up. And the Essenes kept all of the ancient history books. And so that's basically what we're talking about.
So, and these scrolls were discovered by a shepherd boy, if I'm remembering correctly, in Qumran, in a cave. Am I correct on that?
Yes, this last go-around, back in the 1940s.
Okay.
When you go back and look at history, everyone knew about the Essenes and the fact that they were in Qumran and that they probably left valuables behind. And throughout the centuries, people would go look for things. And if you could find something in the Judean hills, there are patriarchates and churches that would pay a lot of money for something like that. And then you've got people that would make fake ones up, just to sell and make money. So, but all through the centuries, everybody knows this. But finally, Israel comes back as prophesied. And what's interesting about it is in Isaiah I think it's chapter 29, it talks about Israel coming back. And the description is very clear. Anytime you see Israel coming back, it's either 536 BC under Cyrus, or it's 1948 from the Roman expulsion. So you look very careful at what's going on. It's talking about 1948, not 536 BC. And it very clearly says that there's a war, everybody attacks them, but in a moment it'll be like a bad dream and everything will be gone, and Israel will be solidified back in her and be back in God's grace. But when this happens, the old ones begin to speak out of the dust of the earth. And the very day that Israel became a nation, the story is told by Israel Yarden, who was a professor, and he had wanted to get the first of the Dead Sea Scrolls into Israeli hands, and it was expensive, so he had to wait a long time to get enough money to go buy it. He finally got enough money from the university, went down and bought the scroll, and then on the way back to the university, he found out he couldn't get there. Apparently, Israel had declared its independence and as a sovereign state, and a war had started. So he had to take it elsewhere, and then eventually it's really cool. And the very first scroll, of course, is the prophet Isaiah. Wow. So I've often wondered, did Isaiah know it was his scroll that would be the first of the old ones speaking? But the church fathers tell stories along the lines like this too, but there's a lot of reasons for it. But I really believe the Dead Sea Scrolls are the rest of the story, and it's going to help in a lot of people coming to the Lord.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I've never heard it put that way.
I was going to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't just this point about the first scroll being Isaiah, isn't that's what Jesus to declare himself when he read out of Isaiah?
Yeah.
Right?
But the first recording we have,
that's pretty crazy. All that. It's a wild story.
I think the Gospels record him a couple times. He'd go into
synagogue.
In a synagogue, and they'd hand him the scroll.
Right.
So he wasn't even picking it out.
Right.
And then he would read. I can't recall, but I know he says, "Today this is fulfilled in your hearing." It might have been Isaiah 53. I don't know what it was that he read.
60, I think, or one of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So, that's pretty cool that Isaiah is just, the book is incredible itself.
Yeah, amen.
So were there parts of, am I wrong in thinking that there were parts of the New Testament that were discovered with parts of the Dead Sea Scrolls as well?
There are some fragments, and the fragments are so fragmented that it may or may not be. So there's no definite proof there's any New Testament doctrines, documents in the Dead Sea Scrolls proper. There are things elsewhere but not with the Dead Sea Scrolls.
So you mentioned, for instance, the doctrine of the Trinity, and you said David would have known about that.
Yes.
How would he know that? Because I remember when Jesus rose from the dead, and then on the road to Emmaus, he's talking to the two people. And it says, beginning with the Psalms and the prophets, he explained to them everything concerning himself. And, and then he separates from them, and they have this moment where they're like, oh, we just talked to the Messiah. But how would David know about the Trinity in that regard? What?
Well, the prophecies have always been, that there's God and you call him a father, and he's referred to a lot of times as Hashem. So there's Hashem, the Father, and then there's a consistent list of prophecies about the Messiah being God incarnate. Now, that's not that Hashem incarnates. Somehow Hashem is still Hashem.
Right.
Father is still the Father, and the Messiah is different, but somehow they're also the same person. So they didn't say it's a Trinity or try to name it. They just said it is what it is. And then, of course, all the prophets knew the Holy Spirit very well. So they understood that there's the Father, the Messiah, and the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, and that somehow these are God. And that was the consistent teaching all the way through. And basically their concept is, you get these people that say Messiah is just a guy that comes to fulfill a war. He's just a man, and there is no spirit, like the Sadducees said. So there's no Holy Spirit either. There's just God the Father. They considered that heresy because that's not what was taught. They have all the writings of the patriarchs, which is basically like a last will and testament that you would write to your kids. And there's a collection of those from Adam all the way down to Aaron. And everyone agrees that those things existed, but everybody says, well, they're probably not around anymore. Well, the Essenes kept the entire library.
No
and
way.
it would be debatable, except as a Christian, I believe the New Testament. So when I pick up the testaments of the patriarchs and I read them and their theology is identical to a Trinity and the Messiah and everything, there's no way. I mean, I have to take sides with the Essenes against the Pharisees. So I believe there is a Holy Spirit. The Pharisees said, no, virgin birth, that meant something else.
Right.
And the Essenes were saying, no, virgin birth means virgin birth.
Right.
It's a girl that's a virgin that gives birth. I mean, it's not hard. It's like today they'll argue that place in Isaiah, I think it's chapter 7, a virgin will conceive and bear a son, and you call his name Emmanuel. And they'll say, well, it could mean young girl. Well, young girls that are not married that wind up pregnant are executed, so that's not a sign anyway. An old woman giving birth would be a sign, it'd be kind of odd. But the virgin part, and they actually they argue that the word Alma or Bethula means virgin or it's not or that kind of stuff. But the scrolls are very clear. They don't even use those words. The scrolls literally say, from the Testament of Nathan, literally says that there is a woman who has never known a man. And she holds in her arms her baby boy, who is the Lord of the earth to the end of the earth. Now, there's only ever been 2 kings of the earth. That would be Adam and then Noah when it started over. And they both lost control. And so this other baby boy is a Lord of the earth, and it's hers, and she is a direct descendant of David, and she is a virgin. And there's a lot of talk and explanation about this in the scrolls. So when you say virgin birth means something else, it's like you're ignoring a whole lot of history from the temple library.
Right. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the Essenes.
Basically, we had Melchizedekian priests from Adam all the way down to Jacob. And as you know, Jacob said from now on the kingly line would go through Judah, and the priestly line would go through Levi. So from that time forward, to be a priest, you had to be a descendant of Levi. Well, you get Levi, Kohath, Amram, and then finally Aaron, which is Aaron and Moses.
Yeah.
And then there's a prophecy that from now on, to be a high priest, you have to be a direct descendant of Aaron. Okay. And it's still a Levitical priesthood, but it's an Aaronic priesthood. So if you're descendant of Levi but not of Aaron, you can do some temple stuff and help out, but you cannot really serve in the priesthood.
Yeah.
Well, when we get down to the time of David and Solomon, there was a rebellion, and Solomon, through inspiration of the Holy Spirit, said from now on, you have to be a Zadok priest. Zadok was a direct descendant of Aaron. So it's still the Aaronic priesthood, but only Zadok priests actually serve in the temple, and they're the original priests. Well, when we get down to the beginning of that 400 silent years, there's another rebellion. A lot of things change. The Jews begin to apostatize again. They throw out the Zadok priests, and they actually end up having to flee to Egypt for a while, which is part of another Isaiah prophecy, actually. But they do this, and then the people that follow the Zadok priests call themselves, or are called Essenes in Greek. And it basically just means healers. They were known to be experts in prophecy, and they had herbal medicine. The average lifespan back then was about 56. The average lifespan for an Essene was 120.
Wow.
Average lifespan?
Average. Yeah.
Wow.
It's just a double lifespan because of their herbal medicine. And we're still trying to gather all that information back because that would come in really handy.
We could use that right now. Yeah.
Amen to that. Yeah. So we're exploring that area too. But so what happens then is the Sadducee groups form. And the Sadducees, if you think about it very carefully, Sadducee or Zadaki, they took the name of the Zadok priests and said, we're the real ones. We just don't believe in anything. And so you have the Sadducee group, and then the Pharisee group forms between the two of them, and then the scribes form. So there's these different groups forming for different reasons.
Well, that was a really good setup for us, because when you think about the temple and you think about serving in the temple, most of guys in our camp, they're going to believe that there's a third temple that's yet to be built. Mm-hmm. And when that temple's built, how are they going to determine what line the priests are going to be able to serve for the sacrifices and all that are supposed to start up again?
Yeah, the scrolls talk about when Messiah comes to set up the kingdom, the Messiah will know. At this point, we don't know. I mean, just because your name is Cohen doesn't necessarily mean you're a priest, or maybe you are, maybe you're not. Maybe your family knows, maybe it's confused. So there's really no way for us to know for sure. As far as the priests that are over there now, I don't know if they think or know for sure that they're Zadok lines or what. But we do know in the book of Ezekiel, in the last 10 chapters, it talks about the millennial temple, that it's going to be run by Zadok priests because of the prophecies.
Yeah.
So somehow it comes back. But this next temple, though, in the tribulation period, it may not be a proper temple. It may not have proper worship. I mean, it's going to be desecrated by the Antichrist. It's basically not even telling us God wants it that way.
Yeah.
It's just a prophecy saying Jews get together, the Jews rebuild it, then there's going to be an Antichrist, just telling us stuff.
Yeah. So you pull that out of, because my understanding was that when they came back from exile out of Babylon, they kind of lost a lot of their genealogical records exactly, and then throughout history, it's just gotten worse progressively.
Yeah, that's probably true. The Essenes kept very good. There's this one record that talks about, and we don't have it, but there is a very precise genealogical record of who's who and who served and in what years and what prophecies were fulfilled and that kind of stuff. So it looks like the actual priests, because they kept the calendar and the genealogical records and all that, they probably knew. But when you have Sadducees and Pharisees wanting to usurp control and say they're actually the real guys, that's when things get messed up and actual documents disappear.
Yeah. Fake news, right?
Yep.
If you can change history, then you can control the future. One of the things that I was thinking about too was during the because my whole question about who would serve was mainly thinking premillennial, like when the third temple is going to be built. Do you think that temple will be destroyed, and then the millennial temple that Ezekiel talks about will be made by God himself?
I'm not sure if God does it directly all by himself or we have some sort of help, but it's obvious that the millennial temple and the tribulation temple are totally different.
Yeah.
They have plans. They have basically everything they need to do now to rebuild the temple. They have a priesthood anyway. I don't know if it's legit or not, but a priesthood ready to go. And they've said that according to the law, they have to have the official government that's there in Israel now give them permission to take over the Temple Mount. And once that happens, they can put up a tent, a tabernacle, and start sacrifices within 2 weeks.
See, I didn't know that. Wow. That's interesting. But I had heard that they could actually build the temple in probably like 3 months. They could get it done. It's not real,
probably.
It's not big, It's not, when you look at the dimensions, if they try and make it similar to what it was during, during Nehemiah's time, it's not real big. But
yeah, they have the architectural plans out. You can go to the website of the Temple Institute and see a lot of the stuff that's already been made, and then the plans for it.
Yeah. Man, that's it's incredible that they already have everything made. All they need is a building. Now, you had mentioned, I was listening to one of your, or no, I was on the Telegram that you guys have, and someone had mentioned on the Telegram about leaders of Israel. There was a certain number of leaders of Israel that has to be fulfilled or something, and we were approaching, like, I think the number was like 18 or something like that, and we were at, like, they have this interim leader right now, and they're going to have somebody soon, like I think in the fall. But can you expound on that? Do you know what I'm talking about, or am I?
Yeah, there's several prophecies along that line. There's a prophecy out of Micah chapter 5 talking about between the time of the second return of Israel and the second return of the Messiah would be 8 principal leaders in Israel. Mm-hmm. And the way you figure those out is that they have a war with Assyria where they take Syrian land. And so there's supposed to be 8 of those, and that's happened 4 times. So we're about halfway through that. There's another prophecy, though, about shepherds from the book of Enoch. And it talks about from the time of the second return, there are so many government structures and so many people that rule in so many cycles. And it's kind of cryptic to understand, and I don't completely understand the whole thing, but I wrote about it in the commentary part of my book of Enoch. But it's between that and when the second coming occurs. So it's really interesting to see that, though, because everything seems to be pretty legitimate. Going back to the Messiah, for instance, there's a prophecy given in the book of Enoch that from Enoch's time forward, the Messiah would be here in 70 generations. And if you go to Luke chapter 2 and you go back and you look and start with Enoch and go forward and get to Jesus, it'll be the 70th generation. So you have to understand that it's like the old ones actually knew Messiah is coming, but it's not going to be any second. It's going to be, and a generation is like if I had a son when I'm 15, my generation's 15. If I waited till I'm 50 and had a son, that generation would be 50. So it's not a set number of years, but it's just generations. But you can tell it's like, well, my great-great-grandson will give birth to the Messiah. Okay, so that's going to be a while.
Right. And it all goes back to the original Genesis chapter 3 prophecy about, that God pronounced when he's cursing Satan, and he says to Eve, he's talking about your offspring will crush his head and he will bite his heel. And that prophecy alone carries through. I think people underestimate the strength of those words as they carry through. For just from a clearly, like I think about, like, in general, all of the Babylonian religions, how they Samarias, I believe is how you pronounce it, when she was pregnant and she had Tammuz, and she was trying to usurp that prophecy and twist it, that he would be the one, the son of Nimrod, or not Nimrod, but her lover after Nimrod's death. It just blows me away. Now, one of the things that you had also mentioned was this number of 6,000 years of history leading up to the second or the return or the second coming. Where do we find that, and where are we on the scale, in your opinion, on the timeline?
I was going to say, it sounds pretty close. If we were just talking about all the,
Well, the idea that we have 7,000 years of human history, and the last 1,000 years is a literal millennial reign of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. That means we're kind of on our own doing whatever for the 6,000 years. And the early church fathers, there were several people that taught this, and then the rabbis also, and the Dead Sea Scrolls all teach this concept. But the numbers are all off. So the current Jewish year right now is, the Pharisee date is what I call it, the normal Jewish calendar. It's Tammuz 19 today. It's Tammuz 19, 5782. Okay, and so it's like 160 years off from the Essene calendar. The Essene calendar today is Tammuz 27, 5947. So we have exactly 53 years, a little less than 53 years to the year 6000, which theoretically, by that time, we should have a millennial reign. Jesus is here. All the prophecies are fulfilled. Now, I'm not trying to set a date, and
Sure.
I'm a little different than average. I mean, if there was a date in the scrolls or in the church fathers, I would tell you, because I'm still not setting a date. But if someone else set a date, I would like us to know.
Yeah.
Jehovah Witnesses have set lots of dates. They've all been wrong, but I'm going to tell you that too. I mean, it's just there. And so it looks like they knew a lot more than they're explaining it. But basically, there's a couple documents that explain how the numbers got off, how we missed the, it was basically a conspiracy by a rabbi named Yossi to change because he didn't like people understanding Messiah came. And when you look at Daniel 9, it's very clear when Messiah comes. You can put it right on the calendar. And so they actually started saying if you use Daniel 9 to try to figure out when Messiah comes, you're under a rabbinical curse and you will never have eternal life.
Oh my goodness.
And that's in the Talmud and everything. It's like, don't look at this thing. And it's like, anytime somebody tells you not to read scripture, ignore them.
Right.
They have no authority to send you to hell. No pope can do this, no rabbi. So, and if the God gave you the scriptures, he gave you the scriptures.
Amen.
Now, there's fake scrolls out there too, like the Nag Hammadi, the Gnostic stuff.
Yeah.
Total garbage. Dead Sea Scrolls are very, very important. But yeah, that's where we're at on that particular calendar. But it's been taught by, and that's what's really cool. The early church fathers, the rabbis, sometimes even the Pharisees, the Dead Sea Scrolls, everybody.
Yeah, and I was going to say that's kind of a perfect lead up. We kind of not danced around it knowingly so, but you just brought it up right at the end about the difference of the Nag Hammadi or the more Gnostic texts, and you had also talked about having that we have copies. Correct me if I'm wrong. That were in the Dead Sea Scrolls of the. I can't think of the last will and testament almost of the church, of Adam and these
the
extra
patriarchs.
The patriarchs, yeah.
Yeah, we have probably close to half of them. They're fragmented, so we don't have all of them.
Sure.
But there are some amazing things. They consistently talk about the Messiah comes to die for our sins. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite things about that, for instance, is there is a prophecy that when Messiah is put to death by the priests, God will reject the priesthood and create a Melchizedekian priesthood among the Gentiles. And so that's what happened with the church. But the sign, if you're looking for it, the sign that Messiah or that God rejects the priesthood because they put Messiah to death will be the veil of the temple ripped in half.
Wow.
Now, Matthew tells us that happened exactly when Jesus died.
Right.
Yeah.
But he fails to tell us that was a prophecy.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff in Matthew that says this fulfilled whatever prophecy, and then right around it is 2 or 3 other things where those are prophecies too. He just tells you that's what happened. So there's a lot of stuff like that in there, but the testaments are amazing. For instance, it starts with Adam, goes down to Aaron, because that's when Moses comes along and then starts putting together the Old Testament. But just to give you one example is in the Testament of Aaron. Now, this is Moses' brother, and a lot of my Jewish friends absolutely believe that these things are legit. But Aaron said that in the end, when Messiah comes, he would be rejected by the priesthood, his kids, and his kids would put them to death, and that would not be a good thing. And he basically said, if any of my kids are listening to me, if you want to be in God's grace, have nothing to do with the nails.
Wow.
That's all. Now, it's fragmented, so maybe he did explain more, but think about that a minute. They're going to put Messiah to death, that's clear, have nothing to do with the nails. What are they, killing with nails?
Right.
I guess they kill him, that's what the whole thing is about. So there's all sorts of stuff like that in there. And again, it just fits with Bible prophecy. So Messiah came and died for our sins in 32 AD, had something to do with corrupt priests, and had something to do with nails. So
wow, that's so incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, this is, just another prophecy of, I was going to say this is nothing groundbreaking, but before the act of crucifixion was even invented. That prophecy, if he's talking about nails. Mm-hmm. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I guess kind of going in that same kind of line, I know Turner has been reading a bunch of your books on these, but what about the, I'm very interested in these, I was going to say part of maybe kind of a two-part. I'll start it up with the people are familiar. I have a lot of Catholic friends, and so they obviously have in the Catholic Bible, if no one is aware, they have a lot of extra canonical books. It's I think it's like 1 through 3 Maccabees, Book of Jasher,
Bell and the Dragon,
and I think it's like 5 or 6 if I'm remember. I don't think it's more than double digits if I'm incorrect, and I'm totally incorrect. But is there any value or credence to, or maybe if you could even go into the difference of why a Protestant wouldn't have them, maybe what a even kind of taking the name, we're all Protestants here, but maybe, is there anything we can glean out of those? Or is it useful for us to read those extra ones? Are there ones to, I was going to say, I know there's some other weird books that I was kind of hinting at, where it's like, I can't remember the name. There's ones of like, I can't. What's the one that has like Noah being born, where he's like shining, and there's like all those extra Gnostic texts.
That's Testament of Noah. Yeah, okay. Gnostic texts are weird. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, basically, let me just go ahead and explain this.
Please.
Basically, what happened in a nutshell is we have the Old Testament being put together, and it starts with Moses. Moses is a lawgiver. He does miracles. And he writes Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Mm-hmm. Then he turns it over to Joshua. Joshua does some miracles, like making the sun stand still and a few other things. And he writes the book of Joshua. So all the people writing Bible books are prophets. And they prove themselves by miracles. Mm-hmm. So I can't actually add to the canon. And if I was going to add it, you would expect me to do some miracle. If I can't do it, I shouldn't be adding to the canon.
Right.
So this goes all the way down to the time of Ezra. And in the Ezra Apocalypse, this is a piece supposedly that Ezra wrote, but it's outside the Bible. But he says that the canon will now be sealed. So the canon is the 39 books that we have. So it's the Protestant canon of the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a lot of other history books, genealogical records. There's actually other prophecy books, some of which are very important for us to look at, but they're not to be added to the canon. Even the book of Enoch, it talks about in the last days of his age, there would be a collection of books put together that the righteous live their life by. Well, that's the Old Testament canon. Yeah. And he says that his book specifically is not to be added to the canon. It's for those people in the last days. Wow. So it's to be kept outside of it. So what happens then is, if you believe that, and then this is why in a King James 1611, it was a compromise between the Catholics and the Protestants. They kept the Protestant Old Testament, and they didn't put in the Apocrypha where the Catholics have it, which is scattered throughout the Old Testament. They kept it separate because of the Ezra Apocalypse. Now, the Ezra Apocalypse is added to the Apocrypha, that middle section, only by Anglicans, because Catholics hate the Apocalypse because it talks about how Roman Catholicism forms in the next age and how it becomes a horrible demonic-like structure. Yeah. So you'll never find the Ezra Apocalypse in a Roman Catholic Bible, but you do find it in the King James 1611 because it's part of the Anglican canon. It's all Catholic except for the Ezra Apocalypse. But if you believe the Ezra Apocalypse, that's why that you keep the 39 books separate. And then, of course, the New Testament comes along and we have the 27 books, and then that canon is closed. Now, we may have another canon in the millennial reign. Yeah. If that's the case, it'll be under Jesus and under the two witnesses. And, but right now we don't add to the New Testament. We don't add to the Old Testament. Yeah. But that missing 400 years, a lot of stuff happened. and we need to know the history. So you got at least First and Second Maccabees, very important for dates and things that happened, and then you've got a lot of the other stuff in there. And so those are good for historical stuff at the very least. I don't know that there's any real prophecy in them other than the Ezra Apocalypse, which incidentally does talk about the rapture. But that's another subject.
No, that's not another subject.
It's not another subject?
No.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
But
I do have a question.
Then what happens is in the first century, the School of the Prophets that was actually ongoing, but we call it Elijah's School of the Prophets because he really formed it well, or reformed it. Excuse me. But what happens is it's passed down from Zadok priest to Zadok priest, and John the Baptist, of course, being the last of the Zadok priests of that line that actually ordains Jesus the Messiah, he has a school. Well, when he follows Messiah and he gets killed, some of his disciples then follow Messiah. Others think, okay, no, I don't think he's Messiah, so they kind of reject Messiah. So at this point, one of his old disciples was a guy named Simon Magus. And we see him in Acts chapter 7, I think. Anyway, in the book of Acts. So what happens, he's a Samaritan. He's studying under John, studying the School of the Prophets, all the extra stuff. He gets to the point where he's kind of fed up waiting on a Messiah. So he goes down to Egypt to study magic. He comes back with a handful of tricks, finds out the Messiah came and it was all fulfilled. And then he tries to actually buy the Holy Spirit like it's a bag of tricks. And Peter curses him. Well, Simon Magus then goes back to the people that rejected Messiah, the rest of the school. Now, the School of the Prophets proper continues to go on, and it's handed off to Agabus, which is another guy we see in the New Testament, and it goes on down. But this other group starts off, Simon Magus takes it over and starts what we call the Gnostic schools. It branches off into 22 different Gnostic schools, and those guys are like total idiots. I mean, some of it's perverted, but a lot of it's like a guy on drugs. Doesn't even make sense. But that's where we get all this weird Gnostic stuff. And so the Gnostic library is the Nag Hammadi library, and it was found in Egypt in 1947, right before the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And what's interesting to me, though, is the church fathers explained all this stuff, but everybody says, well, church fathers, they make stuff up. I don't know that they ever made anything up, but they find the Nag Hammadi text, and sure enough, they teach the same weird stuff that they talk. So a lot of people ask me, like, well, you've made the book of Jasher, you've made the book of Enoch. When are you going to do the Gospel of Mary, Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Judas, things like that? We're not going to, because that's garbage. That's just junk. It's made up stories. It's not real. Well, how do we know this? Well, number one, the church fathers tell us flat out which cult wrote them and why and what's in them that's wrong. And then now we have the Nag Hammadi text that, sure enough, that's what it is. So the Dead Sea Scrolls, I don't know a single thing in the Dead Sea Scrolls that's not amazingly accurate. I don't know one thing in the Gnostic archives that's worth even looking at.
That's incredible.
That's well summed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I have a question about Enoch and what you said. You mentioned there that he said it should not be included in the canon because it's reserved for those in the last days.
Yes.
What are we talking? Last days that we are in right now, or last days of the patriarchs before Messiah comes?
I think it's the last days that we're in, because it's in chapter 1 that he says that, and then it's Peter or Jude. I think it's Jude. Jude quotes Enoch 1:7, I think it is. But the prophecy then is he's talking about the end times when judgment comes. Jude quotes him and says that's when Messiah comes back with all his saints to judge the ungodly, etc. So if Jude is quoting it and Jude understands by the Holy Spirit, or the Holy Spirit's actually writing this through Jude. So the Holy Spirit is telling us that this particular prophecy from the book of Enoch is not first coming, but second coming. And so, but there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. The first 6 chapters are all about righteousness and the second coming and how everything is established. So then you get a bunch of chapters talking about the Nephilim.
Yeah, that's really cool. Have you seen a rise in interest in the book of Enoch over the last, 5-10 years or so?
Yeah, I think so. Several things have happened. Enoch was basically lost to us. All the early church fathers really liked the Book of Enoch. It's not to be added to the canon. We all understand that, but you got to have it in your library. And then somewhere a couple hundred years later, they started saying Enoch was heresy, mainly because Enoch talks about the Nephilim. And what had happened was you have all the rabbis, the Dead Sea Scrolls, all the church fathers, everybody agrees that Genesis chapter 6 is referring to angels and women.
Right.
And they not only tell us that, but they have the entire pre-flood history, the civil wars between the giants and what happened and why and how it ended and all that stuff. So they've got a lot of history, so they know exactly what it is. But what happens is with I lost my train of thought there. What was the question again? Sorry.
Was there a rise of interest in Enoch, and then you started to share why it went awry and people weren't, reading it?
Yeah. Well, what happened was late 2nd century, early 3rd century, people started talking about how it's really Sethites and Canaanites. It's got nothing to do with angels. And so Enoch, since it gives a lot of the history, has got to be junk. I mean, if it didn't happen and he has a whole history of how it happened, then they have to reject the entire book. So Enoch kind of gets lost in the medieval times. But then it's found by R.H. Charles, I believe, and he translates it into English in the 1800s. So it's only been around a couple of hundred years. Now, the Ethiopic version has some alterations to it, mainly Jubilees and Enoch from the Ethiopic versions have the numbers are messed up. The chapters we have from the Dead Sea Scrolls, the stories are the same, it's just different numbers. So we do have to take it with a grain of salt, knowing it's went through several translations. But recently, with all the stuff with the Nephilim coming out, the DNA tests, and like in Peru, all that kind of stuff, a lot of people now are beginning to realize things. In the back of the Book of Enoch, it actually talks about the 70 shepherds prophecy. There's 2 or 3 prophecies that have been fulfilled already in our lifetime, and others getting ready. So apparently there's some real prophecy in it. And so a lot of people are coming up to look at that kind of stuff. So again, the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They quote from it. The church fathers quote from it. Right. You look at it, and it's got at least some legitimate stuff in it. The other thing was the calendar stuff came out.
Yeah.
So there's an Essene calendar, just to be real brief with it, and they say that the Pharisees messed it up. It was a prophecy that they would apostatize and go to a lunar calendar, which is what the current Jewish calendar is today. And it's supposed to be solar. And they explain all this in this. Well, the Book of Enoch explains all the stuff with the dates and the calendars, and the Enoch calendar is the Essene calendar. So again, it makes people go back and start looking at this. So there's a lot of things that have developed that have pointed people to go back and start looking at this stuff.
So the Enoch calendar or the Essene calendar was a solar calendar?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the same one as we have in the Old Testament. So, for instance, the 14th of Nisan is Passover, but the question is, when does the new year start? And the current Jewish calendar would say it's the new moon closest to the spring equinox. Well, the Essene calendar says it's the Wednesday closest to the spring equinox. And they keep all the Sabbath cycles together. They have a leap week instead of a leap month. And if you think about it, ours is really accurate. We have a leap day every 4 years. They have a leap week every 5 to 6 years. That keeps all the Sabbaths in sync. And it's a 364-day calendar, so it keeps all of the days together. So Wednesday is always the first of the year. Tuesday's always the day of Passover, the 14th of Nisan. So it's really cool. You can go back through the New Testament, and they'll tell you. If you ever noticed, it'll say, we did this today, and then 3 days later this happened. And you're always like, I wish I could go back and figure out when that was. Right. You can instantly know what it is by looking at the Essene calendar, and then all of a sudden you see these patterns and these prophecies out of stuff. Really, really amazing.
Yeah.
I noticed you had the Essene calendar on when you were doing your last YouTube. You had kind of the calendar up on the side there. And
Yeah.
it was confusing to me because I don't understand it, but now it's starting to make more sense to me as I'm listening to you talk. But when it comes to that, I want to go back to that 6,000 year again. So you're saying that the Essene calendar is probably more accurate than the current calendar that we have from the Jewish. And was that calendar changed by the Pharisees after, like, was Babylon part of that when they were in captivity, that it would go to a lunar because of some sort of pagan, worship of the moon?
Yeah, it actually started, the prophecy for the changing to a lunar part started with Antiochus Epiphanes and his group. So if you look at the Seleucid Empire's calendar, it's exactly the same calendar as what the Jews have today. It's a lunar calendar setup. And so according to the scrolls, that's when that particular prophecy happened. As far as mixing up the years, why they're not 53 years away from the year 6000, there's a book called the Seder Olam, and it was a guy who follows the Pharisee line back in 160 AD who tried to put together a chronology. So he'd use the Bible and whatever the Pharisees said. Except in the book, he gets up to Daniel and says, obviously Messiah came and fulfilled this prophecy. With all due respect, we know what happened. And then he begins to say that the problem is there was this rabbi named Yoshi that didn't like that. And he said, well, the prophecy of Daniel 9 isn't from the going forth to rebuild Jerusalem to the death of the Messiah. The prophecy really means from the destruction of the first temple to the destruction of the second temple. It's really got nothing to do with the Messiah. And so he changes all the dates, and he's basically laughed at because you can't do that. You can't. The 200 years of Persian rule down to 20 years, you just can't do that.
Yeah.
And so then he changes it again and comes up with a totally different theory on how to change the numbers. And again, he's laughed at and pushed out. Well, 200 years later, somehow now we're 160 years off. So it's this guy named Rabbi Yoshi. So it's cool that we have that from the Pharisee camp that explains how and why they changed the calendar.
Let me ask you a question about Daniel chapter 9 and the 70 weeks. I've heard a position that the 70 weeks that Daniel talks about was fulfilled already. That when Messiah came, and I think it's around verse 26 or 27, somewhere in there of chapter 9, where it talks about how he will end or cease the sacrifices, and it would be halfway through, 3.5 years through. And they would apply that to the covenant that was given when in the Last Supper, and then the establishment of the new covenant, and then Messiah dying would be fulfillment that there'd be no longer a need for sacrifices. But I've always been taught that is connected to the Antichrist setting up the abomination that causes desolation 3.5 years through the treaty. Can you explain some of that better to me? Because it is a pretty strong argument.
Yeah. Well, first off, again, if we go back to what the church fathers teach, they all teach that Jesus died at the end of the 69 weeks. That 1 week is part of Daniel chapter, is about the Antichrist. And they connect it with Paul saying that there's the week and the signing, and then the Antichrist sitting in the temple. So they all teach what you and I have been taught very, very clearly. But the one thing, when you just look at Scripture, and it's really pretty straightforward, it talks about there's 7 weeks, and then a wall and a moat is built. So the wall of the city is finished in 7 weeks. Then there's another 62 weeks, and then the Messiah is put to death. So the Messiah is put to death at the end of the 69th week. So it's very, very clear. So he dies, and then we have this extra week. So if you think about it, it's actually pretty straightforward, and you can't really argue it too much, because there is it's basically a gap between this. So if the person in verse 27, whoever this person is, it says that the Messiah is cut off, then a prince comes and destroys the city and the sanctuary. So we know that that was Titus, and I think almost all the Jews will agree on that. Then the next verse has a prince, Titus or Jesus or somebody, some prince, coming in and stopping the sacrifices in the middle of that week. So if you look at it, Jesus dies, and then 40 years later, Titus destroys the temple. Mm-hmm. Then you have to have another gap to where the Jews come back in their land. And then after that, there's another gap, and they finally build a temple and start sacrificing. Only then can someone come into the temple and stop the sacrifices.
Gotcha.
So if Jesus died and Titus destroyed the temple, who after Titus comes in and in the midst of a week after a bunch of sacrifices stops sacrifices? So you can see there's very clearly a gap. So the church fathers, again, and all those guys teach it properly, I believe.
Awesome. That's great, because that
explains it.
That explains it, because it was a pretty strong argument that I heard. Another. Let's talk about the rapture now, because that has to do with end times, and one of the common confusions I think that happens is people are, well, maybe you can help explain it. Matthew chapter 24, when Jesus is expounding on the end times there. Who is his audience that he's speaking to? Is he speaking to future believers in the last days? Is he speaking to the Jews that will come to believe during the tribulation period? And how do we differentiate between those?
Well, yeah, it's a little confusing. First, Matthew 24 and 25 is the same thing as Luke 21 and Mark 13. Mm-hmm. So when you look at it first, Mark is the smallest gospel. Luke comes along, and it's basically Mark, the exact same stuff, but he gives extra information. So then when you look at those two and then you compare to Matthew, it's basically the same information, the same structure, but things are grouped together. So it's almost like someone said, hey, remember when Jesus did that one parable? Yeah. Okay, when was that? I can't remember. Okay, let's just throw it in the parable chapter. So you can kind of see that all the parables are together, all of this is together.
Right.
And in Luke and Mark, you can tell that they happened at different times. But Matthew is just giving you stuff and then trying to put it together, probably for sermons or whatever. So in this case, what we have to understand is Matthew 24 starts out saying that Jesus went out of the temple. They were departing, and he went back and said, look at all these things on the temple. Not one stone would be left upon another. And then they didn't say anything, but he goes out to the Mount of Olives. So this is his Sunday sermon that he normally did. And this was Matthew, again, 24 and 25 together. And so then when they got there, they're kind of all alone now. They ask him this in verse 3, says, he sat on the Mount of Olives. Disciples came to him privately saying, tell us, when shall these things be? And that's in reference to him saying, when are the stones going to be kicked off of the temple? And so that's 70 AD, that question.
Yeah.
But then they ask the question, and what shall be the sign of thy coming? That would be the second coming. And of the end of the world, it says in King James. It's actually the end of the age. So we're talking about the ages and the Essene calendar again. So basically what they're saying here is, okay, tell us what you were talking about, but they actually ask three separate questions. And so Matthew, is going to go in and record what Jesus says about all of this stuff put together. And so it's actually an answer to several questions. One is, when is 70 AD? When is your second coming? When is the end of the age? And what things happen? He begins to explain a lot of that. So he's talking to the disciples and to us, anybody in that time period. So what we need to do really is sit down and look at all the extra stuff in Matthew compared to Luke, and then kind of pull that out, because the questions are slightly different. You got to figure out which part is talking with which question.
Okay. So that does help me. So what about the response that I get? Because a lot of people will say, oh no, Matthew 24, read it, look at it. It's clearly, we're going to be going through the tribulation. Look at the destruction and everything that they're talking about. So that helps me a lot. You basically layer it over Mark and Luke, and then you can get more of a chronological answer. But what about the response to? I hear oftentimes Darby, invented the rapture through some girl that gave a vision or something, and then also they like to throw Schofield in there as well as a dispensational teacher. What do we? I mean, you've kind of answered it already with like the early church fathers, but what about that?
Yeah, basically, there are some very weird dispensationalists, and they're usually called hyper dispensationalists. That'll tell you to take parts of the Bible and throw them out and don't read them and that weird stuff. But dispensationalism basically just means through our 6,000 years, God does different things with different people at different times. Moral law is always the same. But for instance, like their Hebrew roots friends that talk about the law never changes, the law specifically, like the 613 laws, over 400 of them refer to what the priests do in the temple. So that wouldn't even apply to Jews today. It wouldn't apply to anybody because there's no temple.
Right.
So when you whittle that down, there's only about 70 or so commands that are still applicable. And those are all in the New Testament. So a lot of this stuff is kind of hype. But as far as Darby goes, it's interesting because it's basically true that Darby is the one that brought back to most people or the public the idea of a pre-trib rapture. And I'm sure there was a Margaret, whatever her name was, that had a vision, and that may or may not have been legitimate. But the whole idea of saying that he invented it is ridiculous. And it would be just like if I said to you that my name is Ken Johnson. My full name is Kenneth Wendell Johnson, okay? So I'm going to write the Kenneth Johnson version. I'm going to call it the KJV, okay? And so y'all know that I wrote the KJV. I just made it up last year. You all are going to look at me and say, you're an idiot, because I remember my grandparents having a KJV. It goes way back before you were even born. We all know that. Okay, so it's the same deal. Whatever Darby did, however he did it, the question is, did anybody ever talk about a pre-trib rapture before the 1700s in Darby?
Right.
And you've got a lot of English pastors in the 15 and 1600s that talk about a pre-trib rapture. You've got, in the Middle Ages, not too many people talked about it because you have the Catholic stuff that came up and said, now we're amillennial and that. But you go all the way back to the first 2 centuries, and there's a lot of early church fathers that are pre-trib and very, very clear. It doesn't prove that it's right.
Right.
They could be wrong, but you can't say that Darby invented it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. So a question popped in my head about the 6,000 years. Does that parallel the 6 days of creation and then the 7th year, which is the millennial reign? Is that a rest for us in Christ? And does it parallel with the creation?
Yeah, I think that's what how we have a Passover Seder, and when you look at the Seder, it very clearly predicts the Messiah, because he comes and he dies for our sin, he's buried, he resurrects, he's the antidote for sin. All the ritual kind of teaches prophecy. Well, the ritual in a Sabbath basically teaches us that we have 6 days to work and 1 day to rest. And Paul even talked about that in Hebrews chapter 4, about the Christians have a type of Sabbath. It's not actually Sabbath. He calls it a Sabbaton, which is a type of Sabbath, or a Sabbath-like type thing. But he's saying that is the millennial reign when Messiah comes. And so the teaching has always been, and you see this in the Dead Sea Scrolls too, that we've got 6,000 years, and then we have a literal 1,000-year reign of the Messiah on earth. The way they teach it is that we have ages, and the first 3 ages are 2,000 years apart. So the first age was the age of creation, the second was the age of Torah, the third would be called the age of grace. And it's called a temporary messianic kingdom because we understand Messiah, but Messiah is not really here for some reason. And then the last part is only 1,000 years. It's that 7th day, and that's when Messiah will actually be here. It'll be a real messianic kingdom. So that's their consistent teaching. And you see this among the church fathers and the Dead Sea Scrolls also.
I was going to say, just a real quick, and I'll let you go. The just how you broke it down right there with the age of creation, the age of Torah, and then
Grace,
the age of grace. I mean, is that what a dispensational? I mean, does that kind of fit into what would be a dispensational? Because I get called a stupid dispy and all that stuff, but I mean that sounds to me, is that what could mean by dispensational?
Well, I would say it's dispensational. We tend to break it up, and I've seen lots of things like the age in the Garden of Eden is one, and this is another one. Sometimes I'll have 6 or 7 dispensations. Maybe that's correct, and maybe it's not. The early church fathers talked about 4. The Dead Sea Scrolls talk about 4, and they all in those very clearly talk about the time pre-Moses in the age of creation. We didn't have the Mosaic law, so things changed. And then when you get to the age of grace, the temple stuff is set aside, and we have something different. As a matter of fact, we were talking about the Passover Seder.
Yeah.
So originally there is a Melchizedekian ritual that they did in the first age, and it consisted of wine and bread, similar to what we do, but we don't know that much about it. Well, when Moses comes along, he adds to it, and we have the Passover Seder. The scrolls talk about when Messiah comes to start the age of grace, he's going to change the Passover Seder to a new type of ritual. And of course, we see that in the Bible. We call it Christian communion. So it's amazing. But then they actually go forward and say, now when he comes to start the kingdom age, he's going to change the ritual again, because it's a totally different age.
Right.
Yeah, and it's really cool because they started practicing the new ritual even before Christianity started. So they have a different take on the rituals. But it's really cool because they said that in the kingdom age, you're going to have both Jews and Gentiles as brothers together. And what's something that's never happened in the ages before, you're also going to be taking communion with some sort of human beings that are immortal, which is unusual. And of course, that's us. That's
glorified bodies.
Yeah.
And the angels.
Really?
So we're all together as one family.
That's right.
So it's just really cool.
I didn't know that.
It's like, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This just crossed into my mind, and actually Turner has it sitting right here, and maybe this is too far off, but it was just spurred on by when we were talking about communion. And you have the book, The Gnostic Origins of Roman Catholicism. And this is one thing that I know is so paramount to, I was going to say, I'm going to say this tongue in cheek, but if to any Catholic listening, is the worship or veneration of Mary. Is, aside from that, the other thing that is just so, the sacrament, being able to take communion, that's why they wield it as a weapon against, being excommunicated, and it means they're not being able to take communion. Yeah. And that's the worst thing that can happen. And I was going to say, basically, this is one of those things that I don't have an argument for, so I'm kind of asking, and I'm sure anyone that's listening. So when Jesus says, I'll preface this by saying, I was always taught by, in Protestant churches and Protestant apologetics, that when Jesus says to, gnaw on my body and drink my wine, that, the word for gnaw is, that's all symbolic. Whereas my Catholic friends would say, no, he literally means to chew on my flesh in the way that he was eating. And then they point to, there's a couple verses later where it talks about actually some disciples or people there, when he says that, leaving the Passover dinner, that the Last Supper, because they were offended by Jesus saying that. Is there, I don't know, I'm just looking for, is that a Gnostic belief that came from, or is that, I guess, help, all of the above?
Okay.
Or your thoughts on that?
Yeah, first off, with Mary, they all make mention that that Mary had other children. after the virgin birth. She did not remain a virgin. There's actually one part that Origen had talked about, and he said that there's a Gnostic group that is trying to make Mary into an ever virgin. The reason they're doing this is because they want to start worshiping her as a goddess. We know that that's not the case, that Jesus and Mary, or Mary had other children. So he flat says that. Now, they would probably say Origen was weird, but, and maybe he was, but I'm just saying that there's enough records about that, that it's pretty straightforward. So Mary is not an ever virgin, a goddess, dispensator of grace, or anything like that. Even in the Gospels, she says, my soul rejoices in God, my Savior. She recognizes she needs a Savior. So as far as the communion part, we understand that the ritual is actual wine and lamb meat. Okay, so it's the part of the Seder, the lamb, the meat, and the wine. And so the meat and the wine represent the Messiah. But then it's changed into, and even in the Passover Seder with this, the unleavened bread and the wine. And so when Jesus said, this is my body and my blood, as far as grammar goes, he could be saying this literally is my body and blood, or this represents my body and blood. But since you know that he's talking about the unleavened bread and the wine, this is my body and blood, but the ritual actually means these two things are symbolic of the Passover lamb. You've already got a symbol of a symbol of a symbol. And now he says it actually means me. So he's talking about, whether you're talking about the lamb or the unleavened bread, either one, it's my body that the prophecy is about. He's talking about the whole idea is that it's a embedded prophecy.
That makes so much sense. I don't know why I've never the fact that there was maybe this is just ignorant. I never had put it together that there was a switch from the lamb to the unleavened bread. So by him saying that, he was actually pointing back to what it used to be, which is the lamb, and the God is the lamb, Jesus, the lamb sacrifice, the lamb that takes away the sins of the world. All that, that's the disconnect. That's exactly what I was looking for, is that, just like how you said it, that he was using this as pointing to a symbol of a symbol, symbolic. Thank you so much. That was... Don't
you love the church fathers when they answer questions like that?
Yes.
Yeah. And just the fact that, the bread, it's unleavened.
Right.
Leaven is representative of sin.
Right.
And and the fact that there would be no need for a lamb anymore, because he would be the final sacrifice, to be given. And then John sees him in heaven as a lamb that has been slain, standing there alive. But so let me ask you a question in regard since we're talking about Passover and sort of the feast, where I'm 100% Gentile, got saved, first in my family, no church background. My wife is a percentage Jewish, but she's, was raised in a Christian home, where, I have a lot of friends and we recommend that, there is no sin in celebrating the feasts. For instance, if you want to celebrate a Passover, it's all symbolic of, what it means, as we were just talking about. But what about things like the Sabbath, and what about things like I have a sense that some people are going a little bit further than what Scripture would really put on anyone, especially a Gentile. Not necessarily becoming Hebrew roots, but
I'll say Judaizing.
Yeah, almost. It's like it feels modern. It feels like it a little bit. Like, oh, you got to, the Sabbath is Saturday. You need to make Saturday your day that you don't do anything and prepare for it on Friday. And is there? I know there's no sin in doing that, but is that's not a requirement to please God or to honor God in any way, is it?
No, it's even the Dead Sea Scrolls will tell you that the Sabbath was designed for Israel alone. not anything to do with Jews. Now, the Hebrew roots people will say, well, that can't be true, because you go back to Genesis chapter 1, it says that God created everything in 7 days, or 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested, and he sanctified it, and he made it holy. Therefore, we must be doing something like that. Apparently, we've always done that kind of a thing. And what they don't realize is that he's doing a pattern, and it goes back to the calendar again. To understand the calendar and understand the prophecies, you have to keep an accurate 7-day cycle. The entire calendar is built on sevens. And if you get your weeks off, everything's off. So you have to sanctify it and make it holy. Holy just means set apart.
Yeah.
So this is the day when the week starts over. Now, you can take the day off, you can not take the day off, you can do whatever, but you need to recognize this. And we do need a day of rest. And the whole concept was solidified, and other rituals were given with the law of Moses. But yeah, it's it's perfectly fine to do. But like, for instance, talking about the Passover Seder, chapter 12 of Exodus clearly says that when this is what the Jews do, from now on you're going to commemorate it, you're going to keep it on the 14th of Nisan, that kind of stuff. When you get to the end of the chapter, it specifically says that only people that are circumcised are allowed to keep the Sabbath. So if you're living with Jews and you want to keep it, you have to get circumcised. And that means thoroughly converting to Judaism. It's not just circumcision is the very last thing you did after a full year of conversion to convert to Judaism. Now, that's fine, but Paul very clearly tells us the law that he lays down in every single church that he makes is that Gentiles stay Gentile, Jews stay Jews. Don't seek uncircumcision if you're Jewish, but don't seek circumcision if you're Gentile. And he clearly tells you don't get circumcised, because then you're under obligation to do the law. So everybody would say we're all circumcised anyway, and that may or may not be the proper one. But just think about this. If I'm a Roman centurion, I'm a pagan, not circumcised. I hear the gospel because I'm living in Israel, and I convert to Christianity. Paul says, okay, that's fine. Now you're a brother. Under no circumstances get circumcised. Now, if the law is still here, that means he is forbidden to do tabernacles, to do Passover, to do any of those rituals. Not that he's not supposed to, he is forbidden. Okay? And so it's really interesting to look at that. So my friends in the Hebrew roots movement say that I'm wrong when I say the law of Moses is done away. And it's like, well, it's kind of a moot point. If the law of Moses is done away with, then I'm free to celebrate the Passover because I'm Gentile, or not to. If the law of Moses has not been done away with, then I'm forbidden to do it. So why are they going out and doing it? Why are they breaking the law?
Right.
It's like, well, we circumcised ourselves. Well, how do you know it's the proper way of doing it?
Right.
You know, there's another law that says you don't just make up your own stuff and go out. That's forming your own religion. So, and it's just like the food laws. Genesis chapter 9 with the Noahide laws say that Gentiles or nations, you can eat anything that moves. Just make sure to kill it and cook it first. So anything that moves, you can eat. Now you get to Leviticus and it says, now from the Jews, here's a list of kosher and non-kosher foods. But then you get to Deuteronomy, and I always point to Deuteronomy 14:21. It says that if something dies of itself, it's no longer kosher. You as a Jew can't eat it, but you can give it to a Gentile and he can eat it, because they can do that kind of thing. So you see this consistently.
Yeah.
There's Noahides that are, you know, in the New Testament, we call them God-fearers, like Cornelius. So he was a Roman. He ate the ham sandwiches. He was uncircumcised, but he loved the God of Israel, and he was waiting for Messiah. That's all he was supposed to do.
Wow. So what about, like, they would say Sunday is not the day to go to church. You know, like, I always understood it that was the day that Jesus rose from the dead. And so that's when they would gather at the tomb early on Sunday to...
Yeah, I had thought, I mean, just looking at the New Testament, you see that Paul always, and they'll bring this up too, Paul always goes to the Sabbath, or excuse me, or to the synagogue on the Sabbath. But if you stop and think about it, he's not there to study. He's there to try to convince, witness, and that.
Right.
So you go there. I don't care when they go. Whenever they're going to be there, that's when we go street witnessing. Okay? Mm-hmm. But then he turns around and goes on Sunday to other people's places to worship the Lord among Christians. Right. And he says that, when I come to take the collection, so that there's not a big deal, why don't you guys on Sundays, on the Lord's Day, when you get together, bring a little bit, store it up, and then when I come, I'll just grab it and go, and it won't be a big deal. So you can see the pattern. And I often thought that something had changed. But, going back to the calendar again, in Matthew 24 and 25, this is, again, the Jesus teaching the disciples privately. When you get to chapter 26, it says, now, when he had finished saying these things, which is all that prophecy stuff, he said to the disciples, you know that the Passover is in 2 days. Now, if you know that the Passover is always on Tuesday, 14th of Nisan, 2 days prior to that would have been Sunday.
Right.
And you see this pattern in there. The pattern is on the Sabbath, you go to the temple, you do sacrifices, or you go to the synagogue and listen to stuff, and it's the public stuff. And then on Sunday, you go, if you're part of a group, you go to your rabbi and you study the deep stuff. Mm-hmm. So like today, most of us, if you go to church on Sunday morning, it's going to be a very light teaching, an altar call maybe. It's all geared to new believers. But now Sunday night and Wednesday night, those can be really deep. Mm-hmm. And so that's that kind of stuff. So when you know that, anybody that wants to study prophecy, and I've got all these scrolls, come to our Tuesday night Bible study. So that's when the disciples meet. And it's not just Paul, and Jesus didn't do this. This is a pattern all the way through. So you're supposed to take Sabbath off and rest and go do the rituals if you're Jewish, and go study with your rabbi on Sunday mornings. And that's been the pattern all the way through. So it's not that anybody changed anything. The scripture, not the scriptures, the scrolls kind of teach what actually takes place.
Wow.
So what about a Messianic Jew, someone who is Jewish in heritage or lineage, but trusts in Messiah? Maybe they go to a Messianic congregation. Is there going to be a difference there for someone like that?
Not usually. They'll meet on the Sabbath, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, if I move to wherever you guys are at, and say 90% of the people worked in, I don't know, electronics or in mines or something, and for whatever reason to get the shipping right, they worked, say, Wednesday through Monday, and that was just common for 90% of the people in the town. Well, then I would start doing a church service on Tuesday morning. Mm-hmm. If that's when they're, I don't care. It's just whenever we can work with the people.
Yeah.
And so that's what we would be doing. So most of the Messianic congregations, and to preface this, again, I'm a Calvary Chapel guy, and Calvary Chapel has always been super friendly and works with Messianic groups, but we don't Hebrew roots because it's a bit of a difference.
Sure.
But a Messianic group will tell you that the law of Moses is not binding on Gentiles, but we want to keep our traditions. We want to be able to witness to our family. So if you want to fellowship with us, don't bring any non-kosher food if we have a potluck after church, and we're going to be meeting on Saturday mornings. Okay, so that's fine. If I was going to a Chinese church, Mandarin Chinese, it'd be in their language with their kind of food and whatever day they met on.
Yeah.
It's perfectly fine. But the problem is when you get to not the Messianics, but the Hebrew roots that say the law of Moses is binding on every person. Yeah. Well, that clearly violates Deuteronomy 14. It violates Exodus chapter 12. Violates a lot of things, actually.
Galatians.
Yeah, the whole book of Galatians, yeah.
So, man.
Well, I was going to say, we've already had you here. Do you have one time for maybe one other kind of question that is...
Sure.
Sure. I appreciate it very much. So we talked a lot about the early church, the church fathers as being the first and second century, the disciples of the disciples and maybe their disciples, one or two removed. I love how you had, in one of your talks, you had said basically, there's this, I can't remember who it was, but he was talking, there was
Polycarp, maybe?
Was it a Polycarp? That there's a disciple, and he was talking about basically this old guy that used to come around and talk about the prophecies, and that was John. And so like these guys that are very close into it. So one thing I was going to say, just as kind of to set all this up, last year, the year before started, was just kind of going through something, and someone had suggested I start reading the Desert Fathers as just kind of not for theology, not for anything like that, just kind of to get more of a more spiritual, just kind of to read some stuff to kind of refresh, or not really refresh, kind of deepen my faith in some way. And I've gotten a lot out of just the way that they talked about dealing with struggles or hardships or aesthetics, the aesthetic practices, and just all that stuff. What do you think about them? And I was going to say, I know that like definitely reading them have not become have no desire to become Greek Orthodox or Orthodox in the big O Orthodox Church, because I know that those guys like to steal the Desert Fathers and that. But as far as them, would you say that they're, I guess, what do you think about them, about their teachings, about the stories? And maybe, because I noticed there's another one you had said about, in one of your talks and I loved it, where you just said all of the early church were Protestants, basically in theology. Does that follow into the Desert Fathers, or just kind of, that was a lot of me setting up stuff, but
sure.
Maybe your thoughts, if any of that makes sense.
Yeah, the Desert Fathers, what's going to happen in time is you're going to have a group of people that are Orthodox, and maybe they get off in some area, and then later on in time they get better. And so there's always going to be good sermons from each group. The Desert Fathers, though, have a dubious background. And what happened is, remember I was talking about Simon Magus started the Gnostic schools. And then by the time you get to the end of the 2nd century, most of the Gnostic schools were destroyed. And the only Gnostics really left are in the hills of Egypt. And so St. Anthony had heard about these guys in the foothills of Egypt that have a new type of prophecy, a new type of prayer, and a new type of, this kind of stuff. And he goes down and finds them and then brings back this teaching, and it becomes the Desert Fathers. And so the concept of the chants and things like that. The problem is not so much the theology, because I think the Desert Fathers now would be more moral and or Catholic than the other, but they come from that kind of stuff. And St. Anthony's supposed to be if I remember correctly, the father of the Desert Fathers. Yeah. And so you have this kind of stuff, and there's a good amount of history that goes along with that particular time period, that era. And so the main thing that you want to watch for is the concept of sorcery. And the rabbis and the early church fathers taught that sorcery is you altering your mind. So if I take drugs or meditate in a certain way, I can alter my mind. And if I do that, I might actually be able to touch the demonic. And of course, they're going to give me good visions, and I'm going to fall for it. But normally we can't see demons, we can't talk with them, but that's what sorcery is. And so the concept of any type of prayer, usually today it's called contemplative prayer. Anything where you repeat the same thing, even the word Jesus, if you just say Jesus, 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 or a phrase or whatever, you do this kind of stuff over and over again, and it just kind of puts your mind in an altered state of consciousness. And that in itself, is not dangerous, but it allows you to be in a state where you might be able to get a demonic vision. And so if the Lord gives you a vision when you're asleep, or you pray for a vision, that's one thing. But to seek that in that way is just a dangerous thing. So if you're reading their stuff and there seems to be some good stuff in it, that's okay. But I wouldn't do the chanting or the meditation or anything along those lines. And just know that they have a history with the Gnostics way back when.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and that was I was going to say, we've done the first thing that I think of when I hear that contemplative prayer, the emptying of their mind. I mean, that's all very not even New Agey, Buddhist, when they have like the chanting with the Om, that they say that Om is, supposed to be this word of, whatever, that brought the world into existence, but at the same time it's meaningless. So that's why you're doing these meaningless repetitions, which is something that Jesus directly, taught against. So yeah, right. I appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, it's been an hour and a half, so we've been really rocking and rolling. I really appreciate your time. What is there anything, Ken, that you would want to, as we close up here, just that you're seeing? I know you speak in conferences and lectures and things, and is there anything that you're seeing currently that is cause for that you're noticing cause for alarm or warning? That's happening other than like the traditional, prosperity gospel is really infiltrated, or the NAR type of uber charismatic stuff that's happening?
Well, I would say there's several things that are, Satan will always take things that are actually good and twist them. So we got to be careful not to delve into politics too much. There's like the QAnon movement, which has got some good stuff in it, but it's also kind of strange. Yes. We always want to put our trust in Jesus. Amen. And like, for instance, I'm a Republican, so I'm a constitutionalist.
Yeah.
But if Trump was a good guy or if Trump was a bad guy, either way, the Lord put him in, the Lord allowed it, whatever. So we need to keep our focus on the Lord. We need to get out and vote. And I praise God for Roe v. Wade being overturned, and there's Amen. A lot of good stuff coming out now. Yes. So we need to keep on top of that and get our individual states to outlaw abortion and go forward with the rights and everything. So we got to be careful of that. But I've got friends that say, the rapture is so close around the corner, nothing matters. I won't vote. I won't go witness. I won't do anything. And that's the wrong attitude. We need to always occupy until he comes. So very, very important. In the church, we have a movement, several movements, things like, let's not look at prophecy because it divides and it's confusing, and so we'll just let it go. Well, according to the scrolls, it's a sin to ignore prophecy. And if you think about it, that makes sense. It would be a sin for me to ignore morality, which is what they do too, or ignore history. I never talk about David. We just don't do that here. That's kind of silly, Right. A lot of good moral issues. And prophecy is important. Prophecy is how we witness. When you talk about what's going to happen in Syria and Iran in the next few years, and people say you're crazy, but then it happens, they come back and say, how'd you know? Well, I'm a Christian. Let me explain it to you. So we need to know prophecy fulfilled in our lifetime. And since Israel's come back, we've had some 50 prophecies fulfilled, and most people don't realize it. And it's really, really important, and there's a lot more to happen. We should not divide on a pre-trib, or pre-mid, or post-trib rapture. As a Calvary Chapel, we're pre-trib, so you're welcome to come here. You wouldn't be allowed to teach, but because we need to keep doctrine proper, but we don't need to argue about those things.
Yeah.
In all things, we need to seek to learn, seek to study together, and not cause division.
Man, those are great parting words right there. Yeah. Man, well, Ken, I can't tell you how much I thank you for spending an hour and a half with us and just letting me pepper you with questions. I was looking forward to this for a long time because I literally have a notebook next to me with 4 or 5 questions that I wanted to make sure I got to you with. I just want to encourage our listeners to look for BibleFacts.org, check out your YouTube, go to your website, read your books. There's just, you're one of those authors and one of those guys that I can just endorse 100% and get behind, which I'm really grateful for. And I really do appreciate your ministry and all that you do. And the insights that I've gained are invaluable. And and I'm just very, very grateful for your efforts to put that together and
thank you.
How the Lord's using you. But man, the door is always open here on this podcast. Anytime you want to come back, you let me know, and we may hit you up again, have you come back if there's something that we want to discuss specifically. But
that sounds great.
Yeah, and we really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we will catch you next time on All Out War, guys.
See ya.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the All Out War podcast today. If you had a blast, then we'd love to have you back for another episode. So please subscribe and leave a review. We love to hear from you. You can also follow us on Instagram at All Out War Podcast or on Twitter at AOWcast. These episodes are also available on YouTube unless they contain a little too much truth. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.